Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Cosden, and we're going to be talking about soil and soil texture today for you and I together. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's get started. Okay, so first off, a little bit about University of Idaho Extension. We provide practical education that you can trust. We provide knowledge and research from the university to you where you live and when it's convenient to you. We work on a lot of different modern issues that are important to you, including food production systems, 4-H, horticulture, community development, nutrition, forestry, and water. And we have, offices in 42 counties in Idaho. So feel free to stop into any of your county agencies with questions. Okay, and we're going to do a little poll right now. Actually, we're going to skip the poll, I think. But we will play this promotional video about 4-H real quick.
Idaho youth are learning about science, technology, engineering, and math through fun, hands-on activities offered by the University of Idaho Extension 4-H Youth Development. From straw rockets to robotics and aerodynamics to drones, 4-H is preparing Idaho's next generation to solve tomorrow's problems.
All right. So if you have any questions about 4-H or any of our U of I extension programs, feel free to reach out to me or the U and I Together team. Oops, switching on. Okay, first off, a little bit about me. My name is Courtney. I am a soil health instructor with University of Idaho Extension and NRCS, which is a Natural Resource Conservation Service. I have my master's degree in soil science and my background is in ecology. I mostly do, anything soils or soil health education related that anybody needs me to. I get to work with big farmers and small farmers and master gardeners and kids. And so it's a really great mix of different folks I get to work with. So it's a really fun job. And I enjoy talking about soils. I'm stoked to talk to you about soil texture today. Okay, but first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about soil and what it is. So soil is essentially bits of broken down rock that have had several forces act on them over time. So you can see these five forces that soil scientists categorize as soil forming factors in the middle of the screen, including time, organisms, climate, and when we say climate, we can think water and temperature, topography, and parent material. So for example, a couple of these include like organisms. Soil organisms, both macro and micro, are able to move soil around. They're able to ingest soil and add nutrients to it. And organisms are kind of who is largely responsible for creating organic matter, which is a really important fraction of soil, and that's what makes it really like dark and rich. And then another example of one of these soil forming factors we'll talk about climate. So climate has a huge effect on soil. So we can think about our desert soils versus forest soils. So here in the desert, we don't receive very much precipitation. We have hot summers and cold winters. So soil microorganisms, the organisms in the soil like bacteria and fungi, which are largely responsible for nutrient turnover, they're just like us. They can't survive without water and without air, and they have a pretty specific, kind of a specific temperature range that they work most efficiently at. So in our desert systems, our soils form a lot slowly because there's less water and the temperature extremes. We have more temperature extremes versus in like a tropical rainforest, there's a lot of water and the temperatures are more consistent. So the soils are a lot older and the soil organisms are able to work that soil a lot more time during the year. So the soils, so it's the nutrient turnover is very high, and yeah, the soils just tend to be older because of all of that nutrient or all of that organism activity. Okay, and the reason I have a whole job to talk about soils is because soils are extremely important and they provide a lot of different functions. So one of the big ones is storing water. Another one, like we just talked about, is habitat for soil organisms. Of course, we grow all of our food, clothes, and shelter in our soils. So they're supporting our human health. Really just providing, as simple as you can be, providing structure for us to build homes and buildings and everything that we need on top of, so that we're not walking on top of rocks all day. They cycle nutrients and water, and they also store carbon. Okay, so kind of getting back into soil composition. So this is the ideal soil composition right here. So we can see that soil is about 50% soil solids and 50% pore space. And this pore space can be filled with water and air. And that's right. So ideal is the key word here. So soils can be compacted and squished, and there'll be less room for water and air. So less water and air for our soil microorganisms, and that can affect their function as well. But really today we're focusing on our mineral portion of soil, and that is, so that's about 50%. And this, mineral portion we call soil texture. So soil texture is really our different sized, or our proportions of different sized particles. And these particles are sand, silt, and clay. So texture is really important to consider, because when you purchase some land and that land has a certain texture, you're really kind of stuck with that texture. Our management can't really change texture very much, especially in our lifetime. As slowly as soil changes, we will not really be able to affect the texture. And the texture has effect on biological, physical, and chemical processes of the soil. And so the texture really affects how we manage. It affects how we water. It affects how the water infiltrates and drains through the soil, and how it holds nutrients. And then I just wanted to throw in here, if you have heard the word loam before and don't know what that is, a loam soil really just refers to a soil that has roughly equal parts of sand, silt, and clay. So you can see this is our soil textural triangle off to the right. And so this just determines, so basically, I'll show you how to do this later, but we have our sand, silt, and clay percentages on the side, and you basically just find your percentages of these proportions, and you just follow the line up to get your soil texture. So we can talk about that a little more later. Okay, so why do we care? I like to talk about why we care all the time, or every time I present about soil, I try to tell folks why we care about it, because soils are really important and affect a lot of things. So we care about our texture because that can tell us how quickly soil will move not only into, but through our soil, and really dictate water drainage. So how often we're watering our gardens, or our backyards can really be affected by the texture. And so we can kind of see a good example of this in this figure. So sand is the largest size texture portion, and it has these big pores in it. And so water will move really quickly through, or into and through the sand, or through the soil if it's sand dominated. And then clay is a very small particle size, and since it's so small, it has really small pore sizes in between each particle. So water tends to move really slowly into and through clay soils, and sometimes clay can be compacted pretty easily, and so sometimes water will just tend to run off the soil surface as well. Texture also affects soil erosion. Some clay and silt particles can sometimes be easier picked up by wind and moved by water, whereas sand is a little bit heavier, so it tends to stay put. And like I mentioned before, clay soils can have higher productivity because nutrients, because of their, so clays are a negatively charged particle, and most nutrients are cations, so they're positively charged. So they're attracted to our clay particles and they adsorb to the outside of our clay particles. And so clay soils can have higher nutrition because they're able to adsorb more particle or more nutrients to them, versus sand doesn't have a charge, or its charge is very weak. So nutrients are not able to adsorb, so they tend to sometimes just leach out of the soil when we add fertilizer, or when nutrients are just generally moving through the soil. Okay, and so there's a couple different ways to determine texture. One is the hydrometer method, and this is most likely the method that soil scientists or lab professionals will do when you send a soil into a lab to have it commercially tested. We can also hand texture, and this one's really great for if you're in your garden or you're in the field, you can kind of do this. Yeah, so just a really tactile way to determine the texture. And there's flow sheets to walk you through this, but basically you're just trying to feel for the different particles. So sand feels really gritty in your palm. Silt dominated soils will feel really flowery or silky. And then clay soils will be really sticky. And this is what this picture is denoting. You can make, so if you can put some soil in your palm and add a little bit of water. And once you get it to the right proportion of water and soil, you can push it through your fingers and make a ribbon. And the length of the ribbon will help you determine how much clay is in your soil. But the method we're going to do today is called the jar or the shake method. And we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can use the camera on my computer. Let's try this. Okay, why can't I see myself?
We can see you, Courtney.
Okay, you can see me. Okay, perfect. Okay. I've never done this before. Bear with me, folks. Okay, so hopefully you all have, I made a little curriculum, and hopefully you all have this so you can follow along. So basically the first thing you need for determining your texture with this jar method is you need to gather soil. And so I've already gathered soil and I've put it in my jar, and you don't have to use a mason jar. You can just use a water bottle, or you can use this is a quart mason jar. You can use a pint mason jar. It's whatever you have on handy or whatever you have on hand. And so so the instructions talk about how to gather a soil sample and how to sieve the soil sample so you get all of the rocks and the sticks and the big chunks out of your soil, because the finer textured your soil is now, it'll be easier to determine the texture. Okay, and so I've already gathered my soil and filled my mason jar up about a third of the way. It doesn't really have to be exact by any means. So if you just fill it up about a third of the way, and then the next step is so we have our soil and we're going to add our water to our soil. And we're going to fill our jar about 75 to 80% of the way. Okay, and then the next part, so I have my water filled my jar. And so the next part is we're going to add 2 teaspoons of soap, so we can either use powdered dish soap, or we can use salt. And so doing this, so I'm just measuring out my salt here in teaspoon. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon. And another teaspoon. And doing this really just helps our soil, so there's macro aggregates in our soil, which are the big chunks of soil, and then there's micro aggregates in our soil. And so the salt or the powdered dish soap really just helps break up those micro aggregates. And yeah, kind of separates our soil particles so that, because that's how we're going to determine our texture, is by looking at these individual layers of our particles. So if we separate them as much as we can, it's going to be a more accurate it's going to give us a more accurate representation of the texture. So the next part is pretty fun. So we're just gonna shake our container for about 60 seconds. So we can start shaking. Might take a little bit to make sure your lid is on nice and tight. Might take a little bit to get your soil. Hopefully I can get my soil, there's some dry soil on the bottom. Okay. Just gonna shake this for about 60 seconds. So this is really just incorporating our salt or our powdered dish soap into our soil particles, and we're trying to break up those micro aggregates and really just get our particles all mixed around. So after we're done shaking, we're going to want to stick our jar into a place where it won't be disturbed for a couple days, because this presentation, we're obviously, so we're not going to be able to determine all of our textures today. So this is going to be a little bit of homework. We're going to be able to determine our sand layer, but then the silt and the clay layer. So the silt layer takes about 2 hours to settle, right? So the way that this works is our sand is going to settle first because it's our heaviest particle. And so we'll be able to measure our sand deposition after 60 seconds. And then our silt will fall, our medium-sized particle will fall on top of the sand after about 2 hours. And then our clay particles, since they are the lightest and they float around in this water solution for a long time, will settle last. And that'll take about 48 hours. So this is a little bit of homework. Not that it's hard homework, but you'll have to, if you want to figure out the texture of your soil, you're gonna have to, do this 2 hours later, 2 hours from when we set the jar down, and then 48 hours, around approximately 48 hours from when we set the jar down. So I'm gonna set my jar down. And we're gonna start a timer for 60 seconds. And hopefully I'm gonna be able to, okay. So I'm gonna be able to see my jar. So I have a timer set for 60 seconds. And after 60 seconds, my soil, this is really dirty. Hopefully we'll be able to see our sand. So I can already see, it's probably going to be hard for you to see in the video, but hopefully you can see it in your own jar. I'm seeing our sand deposit. And so after our 60 seconds are over, I'm going to measure the height of my sand. And I'm going to do it in millimeters because it's a little bit easier. So we're at 40 seconds. So after 40 seconds, actually, our coarse sand, so our biggest sand particles have already settled. And now we're just waiting 15 more seconds for our lighter sand, or our less coarse sand particles to settle. And so, okay, so right now we can stop and everybody can measure their height of their sand. So why don't we, everybody measure the height of their sand, either in centimeters or inches. And on your worksheet, we have, so on your worksheet, so this is a worksheet that I created. And so there's a space for you to mark down the height of your sand, the height of your silt, and the height of your clay. And so if we take the measurement on our sand, I'm getting about 42 millimeters. And so I'm going to write that down on my worksheet as the height of my sand layer. And unfortunately, this is all we can do right now. So hopefully you have your timer going, and you'll be able to, so keep your jar as undisturbed as you can. And so we'll be able to measure. So now that you have and we can also mark, so I forgot this step, tell you this step. So we're gonna mark the height of our sand layer with our Sharpie as well. So that's easier for us to tell where our silt layer is. So I've gone ahead and marked my height of my sand. It's probably pretty hard for you to see in the video, but hopefully you can see it within your jar. I've marked the height of my sand. And so now after 2 hours, we'll mark the height of our silt, and I'm going to share my screen again and show you a picture of what it can look like. So this is, so you can tell, so this is a great picture. So this is on the jar on the left. This is the height of the sand. You can see kind of our coarse sand, and then it becomes a lot finer. And then we have a color change and a pretty defined texture change. And so this is the height. Yeah, so this is our coarse sand. This is the height of our silt on top of that coarse sand. So this is our sand layer. This is our silt layer that we're going to mark after 2 hours. And this finest layer is our clay layer, and we're going to mark that at the 48-hour mark. And so sometimes it's really hard to tell, right? So in the picture on the right, this is where they marked the sand. You can see the texture and the color, and then the silt is all the way up to the top. And then we have just the tiniest little clay layer. And so sometimes it can be really hard to tell. And this method, yeah, if you want a very exact method or very exact texture, then you would want to send your soil to a lab. But this really just gives us a pretty good approximation of our soil texture. And so really, so after 2 hours, you're going to mark the height of your silt layer. And then after 48 hours, you'll mark the height of your clay layer. And once you're done marking your clay layer on your worksheet, you'll take the total height of your soil in your water and write that down as well. And then there's some simple calculations to figure out the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. And these are right on your worksheet. So to determine the percentage of sand, we'll take our sand height divided by the total height of our soil in the jar, and then we'll multiply that by 100, and that will be our percentage sand, and so on and so forth for silt and clay. And then to figure out your actual soil texture, so that tells us the percentage of sand, silt, and clay, and then our soil texture is all of those combined. And so on the last page of your worksheet, I will stop sharing again so I can show you this. So the last page of our worksheet, we have another soil textural triangle. And the way that this works is, so we can take our percentage sand, silt, and clay. So if you look at, so like this example, I put an example on the bottom. So if we have 21% clay, 37% sand, and 42% silt. The way that you find this is really you just go, so you have your percentage clay that we just determined on our last worksheet or on the last page. You take your 21% clay and your 37%, it doesn't matter which one you do. So let's do our 21% clay and our 42% silt up here, and you can draw a line, or you can kind of just use your eyes to follow the line, and then you find your percent sand, and you kind of are just making, following your lines to go to, into the texture zone that you have. It can be a little bit confusing, but if you look on, if you're looking at your soil textural triangle and you know your percentages, it takes sometimes it takes a couple times practice, but you'll be able to figure out your soil's texture. And in this case, we have a silt loam soil texture. And that's how we can figure out our soil texture. Let me share my screen one more time. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, oops, hold on. Okay, if nobody has any questions, or if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or get a hold of me if you need help doing this method. And if not, thank you so much for participating in this, you and I together, and learning about how to determine your soil texture.